You shaped it in your mind. Total performance. Now the all-new Toyota Supra brings it alive. Super Power, created by a 3-liter 24-valve, 200-horsepower engine. Super Suspension, racing type, double wishbone, fully independent. Super Cockpit, where you perform. The new Toyota Supra, performance without compromise. Now the Supra dynasty begins. Who could ask for anything more?
Well, the Supra's back on jack stands. This time, it's due to the starter click. Yep, the same starter click that we've had a few issues with prior. We've already repaired the original starter by replacing all the internals to the solenoid. We've even put in new starter just to make sure that the solenoid wasn't drawing too much current on the original one, and the new starter did exactly the same thing. Alright, so I installed a new starter, and guess what? More of the same. Alright, so let's take a listen here. So you can hear a click in the kick panel. And then you can also hear a very distinct click on the starter. I've got a buddy's spare battery here, which has been helpful with diagnosing and troubleshooting this starter. And we pulled it apart, cleaned it, touched up and cleaned all the ground contacts, did a quick coat of paint, double checked to make sure that the stud here is not swiveling and turning and causing the issue with the contact inside. I've got a makeshift jumper, which is way too small for doing this job, but it's very short. I'm just going to use some old jumper cables and going to put my foot on this and just make sure that the Bendix is responding properly. Okay, so I'm going to show you right here. You can see that during contact there are some large sparks being generated. That's because the solenoid draws more than 10 amps of current during actuation. Now that we've replaced the starter with a new one, and we've rebuilt this one and tested it, you can watch the Bendix is snapping in and out with ease. There's no hang-ups, there's no issues. We now have to move along and find out what the culprit is. And we know it's the Supra ignition system, but where in the Supra ignition system and why? So next we'll take some measurements. Alright, so I currently have my probe lead in the starter signal wire that I currently have feeding my starter. So we're just going to try to monitor voltage with the key clicking. 6 volts. Wow. Alright. After reviewing the electrical diagram in the service manual, I could see that all of the current going to the starter solenoid is going through the starter contact in the ignition switch. So with it being 6 volts, that means that the switch is not able to conduct enough current to go to the starter solenoid to properly fire the solenoid. So while trying to troubleshoot and looking at the electrical diagrams, the EFI section was a little bit confusing. So if you want to take a look at how this actually all works and why there's a starter relay, the theft deterrent section was the most helpful. In that section, you can see here at the top, there's a starter relay. You can see the pinouts 1 through 4, and you can actually see the start signal from the switch, which basically sends a positive 12 volts to pins 2 and 1 of the starter relay. Then toggles the relay to fire, providing that pin 3 is grounded through the theft deterrent computer. So essentially, the starter relay is only active when there's a ground on pin 3 and a positive 12 volts from the ignition switch to pins 1 and 2 of the starter relay. This essentially means that all of the current going to your starter solenoid is derived directly from the ignition switch, which is part of this problem. So as the ignition switch ages, the amount of current that it can conduct is somewhat limited, hence why we saw 6 volts. So we have two options. Either replace this ignition switch and hope that a replacement is equally as good or better than the OEM, or we can address the main mode of failure, which is the old ignition switch being unable to supply adequate current to the starter solenoid by using a relay. The relay will only require about 150 to 200 milliamps on average, which is plenty low enough for the ignition switch to properly actuate. We can then supply a better source of current to that relay, which will effectively be then routed to the starter solenoid. Now, I'm not sure if the 1J or 2J starters require more current than the factory 7M did, but it is fairly common for people to experience starter issues after doing a swap. Attention, this involves high current electrical devices and requires a professional. If you perform this work, you assume all risk. So the battery disconnected, we jump into the front passenger side kick panel, which this is a North America car and this is where this is located. The Toyota service manual does note that Canadian models have a jumper installed in this relay location between pins 2 and 4. If you own a model that has this jumper and you're experiencing these issues, just remove the jumper and follow these directions. Since 3 out of 4 pins in this connector for the relay are what we want them to be, I thought, wouldn't it be easy just for us to go and change out the wiring pinouts in the back side of this fuse panel? So I started to disassemble this fuse panel, try to remove it from the wall, and I just could not get access to the back of it. So I think it's easiest to outboard this relay in place, and I'd recommend doing that by utilizing an old primary relay here. And there's going to be a few tabs on the relay that you can bend with a pair of needle nose pliers. And essentially what you want to do is dismantle the relay, and you're just going to use the back socket of the relay. Once the relay casing is split open, you can remove the relay pretty easily, and you keep this resistor in place if you see one in there. This helps prevent a symptom known as flyback with high current loads. And make a simple whip like this one here. As you can see, our whip goes to a Bosch style relay. I like this relay because it's high current. Now, if you heard me say simple whip and you're scratching your head saying that doesn't look simple, don't worry about all these other wires you see in the background. The reason why I say it's simple is because there's only 4 wires. Pin number 3 on the factory starter relay socket, and that is going to feed pin 85 of the Bosch relay. That serves as the ground. And then we go from pin 1 of the starter relay socket to pin 86 of the Bosch style relay, and that serves as the positive 12 volt trigger when your ignition switch is on the start position. Now we have to feed the starter by the relay output, which is going to be pin 30 of the Bosch relay, and that's going to go to pin 4 of the factory starter relay socket. Next we go to pin 87 of the Bosch style relay, which is going to be fed from a 12 volt constant power sourced by a 15 amp fuse, and that's just to provide a little bit of protection because the solenoid on your factory starter should never draw more than 15 amps of current. If you experience starter click symptoms with your Supra, I'd highly suggest you do this modification. Just remember to follow all safety precautions. Here we go. Ready? Make sure it's in neutral. Okay, I caught that time.